Hey everybody, this is John Arilla for the Young Turks, and I just want to do a short little live video of some of my initial thoughts about the sentencing memo for Michael Flynn being released by the Mueller special counsel investigation. I apologize, this is a very informal rig, so it's going to be a little bit shakier. The audio won't be as good as usual. Apologies, but I did want to get my initial thoughts in based on my read of the sentencing guidelines release. We've been looking forward to this for at least a few days. And now we have it. And it turns out that according to Robert Mueller, Michael Flynn, formerly the Trump administration, apparently cooperated a great deal. And he is suggesting that in the sentencing, he faced little or no prison time for a number of reasons, which I'll get into. That was certainly not a foregone conclusion. He could have, theoretically, lying to the FBI, you could spend time in jail, and many people consider it to be amongst the lighter of the various crimes and alleged crimes that have been committed. Yeah, that's funny. So let's talk about what actually went down. According to what's been released, he sat for 19 interviews with the Mueller investigator, spoke with many of them. Mueller says that not only was Flynn cooperating, but he also apparently might have prodded or prompted others to cooperate. And considering that Michael Flynn had a more long-standing relationship during the transition and before, was able to provide a perspective that some others that had been cooperating with the Mueller investigation did not. They say that it was substantial assistance on a number of different issues, investigations having to do with Russia and not. In particular, obviously, he knows quite a bit about what conversations were being had about relieving sanctions on Russia that were set up by the Obama administration. That was what got him in trouble in the first place, was lying to the FBI about it. So, look, Mueller apparently thinks that either was not a serious crime, the lying to the FBI, or that just based on what he's been able to provide the investigation, it's just not worth focusing on at that point. I guess that's up to him to do. For anyone who thinks still, after all of this, the many guilty pleas and convictions and indictments and all of that, that there's nothing here, you do have to answer the question as to why so many people were willing to risk going to jail to lie about things that hypothetically, had they simply revealed, would not have been that big of a violation anyway. So with this as an example, Michael Flynn, what did he actually do in lying to the FBI? So he was not supposed to be, before he was actually in the White House, he wasn't, yeah, there's a lot of games in the back there too. He was not supposed to be basically setting foreign policy for the United States. It's a violation of the Logan Act, but the Logan Act is almost never actually adjudicated. Violations of it never really go anywhere. So he could have simply been honest. It's weird to actually commit a real crime, far more substantial, to lie to the FBI for little gain, unless it's part of a coordinated effort to hide those sorts of communications. In any event, it looks like he's going to be just fine now. So let's see. There was an interesting line, actually, that we should focus on. Some of this is going to take some time. The sentencing guidelines were a number of pages. One interesting line is in a paragraph where Mueller was talking about how we need to take into account his military service, his service in government, and obviously in the military as well, should be taken into account when considering sentencing for him. And he specifically pointed out the number of years that Michael Flynn served in the military, including in combat, and said these are reasons why, we have to weigh those with what he did with the FBI. And there was a line in that same paragraph where he said that senior government officials must be held to the highest standard. So for him, he's got the lifetime basically of military service. Some senior government officials that apparently should be held to the highest standard don't have that to actually fall back on. So that's good for some, not good for others, obviously. The backtrack, that's just part of my living room. I apologize. There are some games there. Maybe you can recognize a few if you do play. So, look, it is possible that the judge won't closely follow the sentencing guidelines. I would imagine in this case that they would. So I would say it is likely that he will be just fine now. Now, if you were to listen to Sean Hannity, who's already responding to this effectively live, just like with Kavanaugh, this man's life has been ruined by the things that he did. And so it doesn't matter if he, gets off without any, time in jail, or if he gets onto the Supreme Court in the case of Kavanaugh. The reputation's the most important thing for some reason. So he's probably going to be fine. There are a few questions going forward that are going to be interesting. First of all, it would be interesting if we eventually find out if Michael Flynn provided any rationale for why he lied. I would like to know that personally. I think it's important for the investigation going forward. Why risk going to jail to hide that sort of information? It would also be interesting, why does Mueller particularly care about what Michael Flynn was able to provide in this particular case? I mean, if Michael Flynn, if the only illegal acts he was involved in or aware of were the lying to the FBI, I mean, that's minor from start to finish, obviously. And I don't know why Mueller would be particularly impressed with his ability to speak on those topics. It is possible, if there were other topics that he was speaking on, that might have been more valuable. So that will be interesting to find out. Why does Mueller actually care about his help? What was he able to provide that was particularly helpful in the investigation? If his involvement was simply limited to one arguably minor lie to the FBI, although nestled in a web of lies of that sort. What will Trump's reaction be is going to be an interesting question. Because the thing is, obviously, Donald Trump has access to a lot more information than you or I do. And so something like this comes out, and I would read this as probably a fairly good thing for Donald Trump. Michael Flynn won't be carted off to jail, it looks like, at least this point. Hey, Oscar, welcome as a new member. That's got to be seen as a good thing. It's possible he's provided a lot of information, but we don't have any direct evidence to know that. Just sort of vague assertions by Mueller in the sentencing document. But if Trump is receiving information from his lawyers, maybe who either spoke to Flynn or to Flynn's lawyers, or have access to a little bit of the goings-on inside of the investigation, if he blows up tomorrow, from what seems like relatively good news, then that could actually tell us quite a bit as well. And there have been times in the past where Donald Trump has exploded and gone raging about the Mueller investigation on Twitter, wait a couple of days after that, and we find out the recent updates about Paul Manafort or Michael Cohen, for instance. So we could learn something from him as well. It will be interesting to see what the right-wing reaction to this is. I mean, Sean Hannity lost his mind. Again, it could have been far worse, and yet they're losing their minds. They've come up with this new thing calling it process crimes, that consistently lying to the FBI isn't serious, and they totally wouldn't care if it was anyone else. I mean, if it was Hillary Clinton or something, they wouldn't care about that at all. And so that you could add that to the list of things like the perjury trap, the idea that this is all just, they're outwitting Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen and all of that. So that's what they're going to continue to push, I would imagine. I'm hoping for a little bit more level-headed response to this tomorrow once we've had a little bit more time. Maybe some more information leaks either from his legal team or from the investigation. That is possible. One final point I want to make about this, and again, I guess this goes to some extent to either on the one hand, people who, even at long last, after all of this, still either want to believe that there's nothing here or simply say that there's nothing here because they have some sort of ulterior motive. The interesting thing is that I had effectively forgotten about Michael Flynn, and perhaps that's true of many of you as well. I don't think about Michael Flynn. I haven't been talking about Michael Flynn on the damage report. I don't know if I've said his name in probably months at this point. And that is what is interesting, is that over the course of these 2 years, there are so many different sets of either different illegal acts that have already been revealed, with Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. You had things like him. You had other aides. It's a complex thing to keep track of. Now, it's not one of the principal things that I cover on my show, but we do have these ongoing legal things that we do have to track. Paul Manafort, of course, now that he's broken his deal effectively by not cooperating with the Mueller investigation, turned out he was actually sort of double-crossing them. Again, the sort of stuff that you probably wouldn't do if you were guilty of crimes. Yeah, Papadopoulos as well, so somebody mentioned that as well. Yeah, he does probably want you to forget about him. And look, maybe in the end that ends up the same as with Michael Flynn, where it's a relatively minor thing. I honestly don't know. We've heard very little out of Papadopoulos and that thing for quite some time. So look, those are my initial thoughts. I would consider this relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. I feel it's worth talking about because, it was anticipated. There was the possibility that there'd be some sort of bombshell. I don't consider this a bombshell. From Trump's point of view, maybe it's a bad thing. He has been cooperating. I don't know how much information he would actually have to give to Mueller. It is on the topic of sanctions. That's the most important point here. And we know that there was suspicious activity in terms of communication with them about getting rid of the sanctions. We've known that for something like 2 years now. And we also know, as of more recently, that Donald Trump was going to personally benefit, hypothetically, if sanctions had been taken off and he had been able to build in Moscow. So he had a personal financial interest, aside from any sort of geopolitical considerations or anything like that. So this is what I consider to be a very reasonable, level-headed response to the news. Tomorrow, I'm sure you'll see hyperbolic, crazy responses from a number of different sources. So perhaps avoid Fox News, and especially Fox and Friends. They're going to be trying to communicate directly to Donald Trump tomorrow. That said, thank you for watching this live video. By the way, if you're not a TYT member, I saw one member signed up while I was doing this video. If you're not, you can go to tyt.com/John and become a member. You'll get access to all of our shows, obviously, and special features as well. A little bit later on this year, we have a fun little host couple game called Hostmates that we did that's going to be released just to the members. Very fun stuff. One of the most fun things that I've done while I've been working at TYT. So look forward to that as well. I'll see you next time.